For a change, this week's lesson will be for the sake of heaven, for the sake of Hashem, trying to improve ourselves. The lessons that we will learn, we'll try to incorporate into our lives. Even a little bit is a lot. In this past week's Sheva magazine, there were a group of, looks here like 50 rabbis, prominent rabbis, that signed the following statement. I translate it. It's from page 35 in the Sheva magazine. In the last year, the new government that was formed in Israel, I think it's about a year coming up in Shvat, and though the government has within it religious elements, it is clear today to see that the government has a very slick, swift operation, that the goal of the government is to uproot anything which has a symbol of holiness. It's a pretty daring statement. In the past weeks, we've seen a wave of laws that are trying to be passed by the same Knesset that's been in power for the last year in regards to Judaism and the state of Israel. We've seen legislation to change the setup of the Chief Rabbinate of Israel. We've seen legislation coming as far as who to recognize as a convert. Legislation regarding couples that do not get married in the Jewish way. The adoption of Gentile children, and also children being allowed to live in unions of two males or two females. It means without a father or without a mother. These laws, if they get passed, they will cause tremendous damage to the character of the Jewish people and the character of the state of Israel. All this is in addition to the tremendous amount of trouble that the government has put the learners of Torah and the institutions of Torah with as far as the yearly stipends are concerned, which means that past year the allocations to yeshivot were cut by 200 million shekel. So, and anyways, we have here Rav Lior, we have here Rav Simcha Cohen Cook, Rav David Chai Cohen from Bat Yam, we have Rav Lebanon here, and I said there's about 50 very prominent great scholars here that came out with this. Which once again, knowing a lot of these rabbis, must have taken a lot of courage to say such a thing. Because this is what we've been talking about, not for the last year, but we've been talking about this for years, for decades. We've been talking about this. That there is a plan here. It's not something that's haphazard. It's not something that's coincidental. There is a plan here. There is a plan here, as the Zohar writes, that before the coming of the Messiah, the government, the head that will be in charge of the Jewish people will be from the side of the Erev Rav, those multitudes that left with us, with the Jewish people from Egypt, where Moses did not contact God before his decision, and he brought in all these multitudes of converts, even though their intentions were not for the sake of heaven. And till this day we suffer from this. So there is a plan here. So when a religious member of Knesset can get up and say that when the Knesset is talking now about, instead of having two chief rabbis, one Ashkenazi and one Sephardi, this is a great step. I heard also a rabbi saying this is a great step forward in uniting the Jewish people. Now, to understand how silly a statement that is, if we understand what the goal of the people that are pushing these laws, what their intentions are, has nothing to do with uniting the Jewish people. It's a step in the wrong way. It's unbelievable how a person could look at that and say, oh, this is great, this is bringing us, uniting the Jewish people, no more Sfaradim, no more Ashkenazim, right, that's what there is a future had in mind. Yesh Atid, that's what they had in mind, the unification of the Jewish people, yeah. So it's really amazing that people can be fooled by such fools. It's the fooled being fooled by the fools. So we have to understand, thank God, some people are waking up and seeing that there is a war here against Judaism. What we see, what's happening with the talks on giving away parts of the land of Israel, what's going on behind closed doors, and they're trying to push this through in the next couple of weeks. All of this is the same plan. What happened in Gush Katif, it's all the same plan. It's a war against anything that's connected to the Torah, to the mitzvot, to the sanctity, to the holiness of the land of Israel, and to as much as possible create a situation to break those Jews who could really take over here, which is the national religious community who could really take over here. It's trying to uproot them. And just like they did in Gush Katif, it's a war against the Torah. It's a war against the Torah, the land of Israel, and the Jewish people as a whole. So that we see here. Last thing that I want to quote from this newspaper is something that Eliezer spoke to me about last week. He was right on the mark. As you know, as everybody here knows, many, many years ago, good Jews from our area, from Shomron, traveled to America to try to encourage people. We're talking about 15 years ago. And Rav Binyamin and Rav Kahana before that have made mention many times that it's very, very important for the settlements to become independent. Because there will come a day, or there might come a day, and we see those red flags flying in our faces, that there will be an attempt to uproot us here from the center of the land of Israel, which is Judea and Samaria. We are in the center of the land of Israel, and not this baloney where they try to tell us the center of Israel is Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is in the lowlands.
Very low.
Very low. The state of Tel Aviv is called the Shvela, it's called the lowlands, and as Avram pointed out, it has a few connotations to why they call it the lowlands. But we are the center of Israel. Look at a map and put your finger right in the smack of the center of Israel, you'll come to the Shomron. You'll hit right on the Shomron. So Eliezer pointed out that a lesson that should be learned from the snowstorm that we had 2 weeks ago. The lesson should be learned that if something happens, if we don't have electricity, if there's some kind of pull, either by weather or by government, etc., we are not able to make a stand here and survive. We saw hundreds and hundreds of families that willingly got up. Of course, they were correct, they didn't have a choice, but we see that because of their conditions, their difficult conditions with little kids, etc., they could not survive 3-4 days in a big snow blizzard, which we're not accustomed to at all here in Israel. So they were evacuated. Hundreds of families were evacuated from the Shomron and from Judea to other parts of Israel. So he said that there's a need here to speak, to talk about it, becoming independent, that we should be able to have our own electricity, we should be able to survive all kinds of attempts, whether it's weather, whether it's what they call nature, or whether it's called any types of efforts that the government are going to come up against us. We have to be ready for it. So, very interesting, after he mentioned that, I just want to read you here a short quote from the head of the municipality of the Shomron. His name is Gershon Masika. Gershon writes, unfortunately, we have learned from this snow blizzard to rely only on ourselves. The army helped us a lot, but those above the army, which includes the home front and all the establishment from the government, all the functions from the government, they were not there for us. Gives an example. There was a cell phone company that all the phone lines, people didn't have phones for a couple of days. So Gershon turned to one of the major companies in this area, and they said, yeah, sure, we'll come sometime on Sunday. Only on Monday, which we're talking about 4 days later, after the storm started, after Gershon got one of the officials in the government involved, did the cell phone companies start to work. This is at a time where the Arabs are burning houses near Har Bracha, and they're trying to attack Jewish settlements in Yitzhar and the hilltops of Itamar. Unfortunately, I must admit that when it came to this emergency situation, the state of Israel did not function. They were not helping. They were not helpful whatsoever. We must realize that we have only ourselves to rely upon.
ערבים תקפו בתים? כן.
Talked about that last week. Okay, so that's a good. We always know that in everything that's bad, there's always good parts to it. To me, in a part of a bad storm and a lot of difficult stories, etc., this to me is the light of the whole story. If this is the lesson that we learn, even though, as we say, it's not for the sake of heaven, we're talking about people when something bad happens weather-wise. But this could be a big springboard to progress as far as being prepared and being independent. So we could use this, even though our intentions are not the same intentions, but because we have both the same intermediate proposals, we agree on the same principles, so therefore we should really try at every level possible to try and to push this within our settlements. If we know people, try to get this point across, that when something comes next time around, that we should really be independent, we should be able to survive on our own, because the government is not going to be there. And those people that rely and expect from the government, they're fooling, they're kidding themselves. They will not be here. So it's about time we wake up. It's good to hear that, and it's good to see that there are people that are waking up. Okay. Now, there's an very interesting point that really blew me away. As many of our classes are involved to talk about the redemption of the Jewish people, how to bring the redemption, how not to bring the redemption. There's a very interesting chazal. A rabbis write that there were 3 or 4 incidents during early Jewish history where people jumped the gun. It's called dachku et haketz. There's a certain time and a place for everything, but sometimes people pull the trigger too early. One of those incidents was in the time of Amram. In the time of Amram. So if you look at the different commentaries, what does it mean? What Amram, he was the top scholar in his generation, Gadol Ador. What went wrong? Where do we see that there was a problem with Amram? So the commentators, many of them write that there was a tradition. We don't know what it is, but there was some point in the time of Amram's life that they tried to push the trigger. They tried to speed up the redemption process, but not in the proper way. So this past week, I was amazed to see the following. We just read a few days ago in the portion of the week, Shemot, we read the following, that there was a decree against the Jewish babies, that all the male babies would have to be thrown into the Nile to be killed. During this time, just in parentheses, we should understand, 10,000 Jewish babies were killed during this process. 10,000 Jewish babies were killed during this process. That's a pretty serious thing. We're not talking about that. We're talking about babies. 10,000 babies were killed during this period of time. So there was a decree by Paro, the king, to throw the first Jewish males into the Nile. What happens? Talmud tells us that Amram goes in front of everybody, because once again, he is our example. He is the leader of the generation. So he goes in front of everybody, live, CNN, Fox, he goes. And he divorces his wife. And everybody follows, because we're doing what the heads of the generation are telling us to do. This is the right thing. So what happens? His daughter Miriam, who happens to be 8 years old, amazing thing, 8 years old. She comes up to her, and today it's hard for us to understand. We've spoken about this a few times, that we have to understand today's 8 years old, today 8-year-olds, of course, could never have come up with something like that. But we're talking about thousands and thousands of years ago, where not too far in the distant past, 100 years ago, kids that were 10 years old, 11 years old, were partners with their parents. They worked, they supported, they helped support the family. They were they were the best friends of the fathers and mothers in participating in bringing up the family. They took a tremendous a yoke on their shoulders to to help the families out. They were part of the workforce. So 8 years old, Miriam comes and tells her parents that what they've done is even worse than Paro. Because Paro, he just decreed on the males, and now because everyone's getting divorced, no one's going to have even girls. So the Jewish people are going to become extinct. So put on a seatbelt for this one. We're going on a curve here. Some of the commentators say the following, that this point exactly is what the rabbis were talking about when they talked about people that pulled the trigger, people that tried to bring the redemption, but in the wrong way. What do we mean? Amram and his wife Yocheved, they sit down, and they sit down with the other leaders of the generation. They sit down with the other leaders of the generation, and they say, you know what? The redemption of the Jewish people comes in two ways. It comes either in a generation where everybody is worthy, or everybody is wicked. So what we're going to do, folks, we're going to divorce our wives, and everyone that will see us will follow suit. And then we will force God's hand, because Hashem will see that now there's no more Jewish people. If Hashem doesn't pull the redemption, there's no Jewish people. There are going to be no Jewish people left. We've talked about it. In order for the next generation to be in existence, you have to have 2.2 kids. So if everyone got divorced, no one's getting married, even couples aren't getting married, because they saw the leaders, the rabbis of the generation have divorced their wives. Then they follow suit. There's no more Jewish people. So Hashem will be forced, so to speak, to save the Jewish people and redeem them from Egypt. Now this should ring a bell, because when we talk about, for example, the times of the wicked Shabtai Tzvi, may his name and memory be erased, his whole idea was to create a situation where the Jewish people would convert out of Judaism and accept upon themselves a different religion, in order that the Jewish people would be under the category of wicked, and then God would be forced to bring upon the redemption. This was one of his plan, one of his master plans, was to go the opposite way, to try, just like there's people that their jobs are, they're out there trying to bring Jews back, so there could be the same sincere people could start a movement saying, listen, we're not doing so well on bringing people back, so let's try to cause people to go far away from Judaism, and this in turn will bring the redemption. What a great idea. No. Hashem tells us that this was something that, this is a way that is not suitable for the Jewish people to take, and therefore the girl that saved the day here was really Miriam, because she convinced her parents to get back together. Once they got back together, so everybody else in turn got back together. People started having kids, and it says, in fact, because of the righteous women in Egypt, the redemption came to the Jewish people. One of the major force of the righteous women were that they continued, even during these difficult times, to have children. Not just one, not just two, as we're told. So therefore, the redemption was brought upon through the tremendous sacrifice to bring children into the world, to continue the Jewish people throughout the tremendous difficult times, black times, dark times that were in Egypt. So we see once again an example that many times throughout history, people through negative means tried to be, with sincere intentions, they tried to bring through treif, non-kosher means, they tried to bring the redemption. This is something that does not work. It hasn't worked in the past, and it's brought many times destruction upon the Jewish people. We have to do our best. We have to do our best to try to learn Torah, to do the commandments, to be as close as Hashem as possible. What Hashem decides to do, that He'll decide to do. But we can't start making programs that are against the Torah, against God's wishes, what He wants the Jewish people to do, in order to force God's hand. Okay, now, in the short time that we have left, we're going to start an unbelievable journey. We're going to start an unbelievable journey that we have to thank Hashem for giving us this opportunity to do it. My humble opinion, the journey that we're about to take here is one that has not been traveled by any, it's hard word because, there's so many books out there, there's so many Jewish scholars out there, it's hard to say by any. But at least the vast majority, what I've seen, hundreds or thousands of sources of books, I've not seen the question being dealt with. The question is the following. There's the famous tribe of Ephraim, which we happen to be in their territory, here near Tapuach. We have to understand that Ephraim was the son of Joseph, was the leader of the Jewish people. Yaakov, everything that he learned in the yeshiva of Shem and Ever, everything that he learned, he passed down to Yosef. It says in last week's, or 2 weeks ago now already, it says in 2 weeks ago we read that Jacob wanted to reveal the time of redemption to his children, to the 12 tribes. But then Hashem took away his ability to see in the future, and therefore he did not. But Chazal tell us that he did and he didn't. What does that mean? He did reveal, but he didn't. To all the brothers, to the 11 brothers, Yaakov did not reveal the secret of when the redemption would come. But to Yosef he did reveal. To Yosef he did reveal the time. And Yosef revealed the time to his children, Menashe and Ephraim. Chazal tell us 30 years before the redemption of Egypt. 30 years before the redemption of the Jewish people from the land of Egypt, Ephraim gets up. The tribe of Ephraim, some of them, they get up and they say, it's time. It's time to return to the land of Israel. They get up and they start leaving Egypt. They leave Egypt and they go into the land of Israel. The closest connection from Egypt in the south to Israel, of course, is in the southern part of Israel, which is the part where the Philistines live. The Philistines see this and they kill all those members of the tribe of Ephraim. From here we see a big question in our times. Anybody that has friends, family, anybody that has learned the books of Satmar and others will see this flag constantly risen and flown. The same mistake claim these groups. The same mistake, the same sin that Ephraim and his members of his tribe did while leaving the exile behind before its time and then being destroyed when they come in the land of Israel because it wasn't its proper time. the same destiny awaits us, the Jewish people that have returned thousands of years later. We've returned after 2,000 years after the destruction of the temple. We've come back to the land of Israel, and they're once again waving that flag in their books and in their mouths, saying that the same mistake, the same sin that Ephraim did, the people today in Israel are committing, and the same fate that awaited Ephraim awaits us, people that have come back to the land of Israel, because God has not taken us out of the exile, and we're still in exile, and therefore the fact that we came back to the land of Israel, it's before its time, and therefore what awaits us is the same end fate that happened to Ephraim. So therefore this point is a very, very important point. In other words, the flag is, as we'll see in the Talmud, one of the oaths that Hashem made with the Jewish people when they were exiled 2,000 years ago. The oath was that the Jewish people should not try to push and hasten the time of the redemption. In Hebrew we say, Shelo yitchok et haketz. There's a certain time for redemption. Don't push it. Don't push it. So therefore this is an important question here. What are we doing exactly here? Are we going the same path? Is that what our fate? Are we just here and there's going to be an end to it? We're going to be destroyed here because we left America, we left Europe too early? Question number one. Question number two. We talk about Egypt and we talk about the redemption. What signs were the Jewish people given to know when the redemption was ready? What signs were we given? Okay, so let's look at some verses. If we look in the portion of the week of Lech Lecha, we see that Abraham, God comes to Abraham and he sees this tremendous darkness in the world. He sees what's going to happen to the Jewish people throughout the 4 exiles. And Hashem says to him, you will be for 400 years in a strange land, and you will be afflicted by the nations. 400 years. Okay? Seems mighty clear. On the other hand, not so clear. It says in the portion that we will read in a week and a half from now, it says that the Jewish people spent 430 years in Egypt. 430 years in Egypt. Very interesting. 430 years. It says in Shir HaShirim Rabbah, in the 2nd chapter, the 8th paragraph. Listen closely. Kol dodi hineze ba. I hear the footsteps of redemption. Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Nechemia v'Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda omer, Kol dodi hineze ba. Ze Moshe. Talking about Moses. Bisha sheba ve'amar li Yisrael b'chodesh ze atem nigalim. Moshe Rabbeinu comes with the flag of redemption to the Jewish people. They tell him, time out on the court. Time out? Let's get out of here. They say, Moshe Rabbeinu, Ech anu nigalim. How can you tell us that we're leaving this month? Halo amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu le'Avram v'ivdu ועינו אותם 400 שנה, ועדיין אין בידינו אלא 210 שנה. I'm glad you're still sitting here. The Jewish people say we're not leaving. What? You're telling Moshe we're not leaving? Moshe doesn't know? Ephraim, they don't know? It was so clear. 400 years. But then it wasn't so clear. 430 years. And now, what's going on here? Moshe says, let's go. And the Jewish people said, no way, we're not going anywhere. Why? Because God told Abraham 400 years. And we've only been in Egypt for 210 years. We got 190 coming up. To make it even more confusing. We said a few minutes ago, 430 years they were in Egypt. There weren't any 430 years in Egypt. They were 210 years in Egypt. They weren't 430. So how does the Torah tell us that the date was 430 years? They were not in Egypt 430 years, they were 210 years. To make it even more complicated, it says in this verse that for 400 years the Jewish people will be afflicted, will be servants. How long were they servants for? There's two opinions. One is from the time of the birth of Miriam. Why is Miriam called Miriam? Because bitter. Miriam is from the word mar, bitter. So when Miriam was born, the actual slavery began. So 86 years. There's a second opinion that it was 116 years. But either way you slice it, God tells Abraham for 400 years. That's the timetable. That's the timetable of redemption. You got to go through 400 years of being slaves.
Yitzhak.
Very nice that you tell us Yitzchak, but I'm telling you what it says here. I'm telling you what the Jewish people said, Abraham, and you're telling me about Yitzchak. Not everyone is as learned as you are. So folks, we got 400 years, we got 430 years, we got 430 years in Egypt, we got 210 years, we got 190 to go, we got 86 years only, we got 116 years that we've done, we got a long time to go here. What's going on here? When is that redemption coming? How are the Jewish people going to know when the time is coming? So, once again, with God's help, as I see it, the first in-depth, it's going to take us a couple of weeks to roll through it, but we're going to roll through it and we're going to see unbelievable things. For perhaps the first time in many, many years, to deal with the subject of Ephraim leaving Egypt, leaving exile, coming to Israel in his time, in our times. And we're going to go through what exactly happened there, what was the mistake, if there was a mistake, how did God look at it, were they incorrect, perhaps they were correct, Ephraim. We're going to see it all. We're going to go in depth on this subject because it's very, very important as far as our future also is concerned.